reminding you of the principles that we'll use. We'll have a proponent of the debate, and the debate topic is a discount rate of 8% for public sector projects is too high, and John Yeabsley is going to present that. We'll then have Martin Lally presenting the opponent's position, namely that it's not too high, and then Bronwyn Croxson is going to help to lead us into questions with some commentary and some opening thoughts for discussion. So, as with all these debates, Girol Carachalou, as head of Gen, and myself are very grateful for the time and effort that the speakers and commentators have put in. And on this occasion, we're particularly grateful to John, Martin and Bronwyn. I'm sure all three of them are pretty well known to you. If you've lived and worked around Wellington for some time, that's bound to be the case. But just in case you haven't, let me introduce first of all John Yeabsley. John is a senior research fellow, at NZIER. If you look at his webpage, you'll see that what he says about himself is he has been applying economic analysis to real-world problems for more years than he cares to remember. That's a sentiment that not just John could adhere to. But John's one of these rare breed among economists. He actually gained a first degree in mathematics and a second degree in philosophy and logic, which among economists strike me as two particularly good backgrounds to have, but probably quite unusual. He then went on to study his PhD under, I guess, what many people would regard in the public finance area as one of the top individuals you could care to be supervised by, which was Tony Atkinson at the University of Essex. So although John has done many things over many years since then, you can see the pedigree of his background and the work that he's subsequently done. Martin Lally is Associate Professor of Economics in the School of Economics and Finance here at Vic. And he is a recognised New Zealand expert on, and has been over many years, on the capital asset pricing model and the cost of capital more generally. If you ask anyone in New Zealand who knows about the CAPM model or cost of capital, or indeed discount rates, who should I talk to about these kind of things? Martin Lally's name is usually first to trip off the tongue. So we're very grateful that Martin is, again, taking time to collect his thoughts together to make a case for the opposition. And then Bronwyn Croxson. Bronwyn is Chief Economist at the Ministry of Health. So you can imagine she's in a department where I should think on a fairly regular basis she's being asked to think about health investment projects with different time streams and what appropriate discount rates should be. But of course Bronwyn is also a respected publishing economist in her own right, particularly at her time in Bristol when she worked in the, I guess it was called the Centre for Public and Market Economics, something like that. Yeah. So Bronwyn will hopefully try to distinguish the reality from the bias, as it were, in the two presentations that we're going to get beforehand. So before we kick off, I just thought I'd perhaps say one or two things about this debate, and particularly about the topic, because you might wonder why we've picked this number of an 8% discount rate for the public sector. Those of you who are engaged in cost-benefit analysis, or indeed any kind of analysis that requires a discount rate, will probably be aware that different parts of the public sector in Wellington tend to use quite different discount rates. Indeed, parts of the private sector also use different discount rates for different types of project. So where does the 8% come from? Well, the 8%, I've got a feeling this might be on a regular rotation, but let's hope not. So the 8% discount rate, if you go and look at Treasury's website, that's what you will see, or at least something that looks very similar to that. So the Treasury website currently says the Treasury has recently reviewed its real discount rate to be used in cost-benefit analysis. The new real discount rates are as follows, and you can see that the default rate is 8%, but other rates are used as well. A lower rate of 6.5% for what it calls general purpose office and accommodation buildings, and for telecoms and software type of investments, actually a higher discount rate is used of 9.5%. So that's why we picked the 8%. It's a kind of common rate that is used in parts of the public sector. That happens to be what Treasury does. But before I ask John to come and talk about that, perhaps you'd like to think about the consequences of choosing different tax rates. So this slide here just asks the question, which any of you can do with your Excel spreadsheet in about 30 seconds. What's a dollar worth in future? A dollar today. What's a dollar in future worth today? And these numbers there give you an idea of, if you choose a discount rate of 3%, then basically 20 years out, you're only valuing that dollar at 23 cents. If you adopt a discount rate of 9%, what you're saying is a dollar that this project produces in 50 years. So if we're building a dam or a major road that we think might last for 50 years, we're only going to value that dollar at basically about a cent. And you can see the trajectory of numbers there. So it really does matter what discount you pick in terms of how you evaluate the returns that a particular project is going to give you, particularly obviously for those that exist over long periods of time. So without further ado and taking up more time, let me pass on to John, who's going to make the case for why the 8% discount rate in particular is too high. Thank you, John.
Thanks, Norman. Well, apart from obviously having miles too much material, when I look here, Martin's only got 1 or 2 sketchy pages, and I'm sure he'll manage to convince you with that. But I'm going to try and tell a story. But I'd just like to start with a sort of brief backward look, because the fascinating thing about this question is just how long it's been a policy question in New Zealand. 40 odd years ago, when I first came to Wellington, it was a question then. And Treasury were solving it not far away, as it happens, from the number that it is today. It was set by a couple of famous names in Treasury history. Dick Battersby and Lindsay Smallbones set the price at 10% in 1971. And then they commissioned some work from us, and I'll talk to you in a subsequent slide about what we said and what the results of that were, and you can see why we've got to where we've got to today. So I'm going to lay out a bit of a story. I'm going to take you around various aspects of this problem, and I'll just say at the opening that I won't be citing any references. I'm not going to use any equations at all, and if I can possibly avoid it. In fact, I'm only going to mention 1 or 2 numbers, and that's one of them, and also omit quite a number of key issues, mostly because of the time, and risk, for instance, is one of those key issues. So the path I'm going to go down is I'm going to start by discussing the issue. I'm going to background the way it works out, identify what's important about it, propose a solution, and then look a wee bit backward at the history, and then talk about what it might take to fix the problem that we're facing. Up or down, Norman? Down. Right, yeah, and all of that in 20 minutes, and I'm hoping to finish early, right? So, why bother arguing for a lower rate at all? So we've heard from Norman about the present rate, and here's 4 issues that I thought characterise the kind of question we're talking about. Interestingly enough, in New Zealand, when you talk about discount rates, both the application and the debate over the last 30 years is focused in exactly the 2 topics that Norman talked about. It's traditionally, discount rates are vital for irrigation projects, dams, so on, and then more latterly in transport projects. And so some people might want to say, and I might well be one of them, that many of the projects that we've used public sector discount rates for in the last 30 or 40 years are projects that you wouldn't want the government involved in the first place. But what we see in these 4 projects is typical policy decisions. They hinge on the discount rate because they're about spending now for some benefits later. And the question is, are those benefits in subsequent times, many of which are going to be spread over a long period or a long time? And we think about, well, is prevention always better than cure? I think if you stop people on the street and ask them, they'd probably say yes in abstract, but it's not hard to construct cases where it's not. It's not if the prevention costs a lot per unit, if the effectiveness of it is relatively low, or if it doesn't last very long. Is it worth trying to cut recidivism? It is if you can be effective. It's not if you can't. It depends on what the relative costs of recidivism are. It depends on what it takes to do it, and so on. And so being able to turn the value of preventing recidivism in the future into something that sits alongside what it costs you today is worth doing so. And we heard from Norman a moment ago about a dollar's worth of consumption in 50 years' time is 1 cent at a discount rate not far away from that we're discussing. So if we start thinking about trying to change the shape of Auckland, it's not going to happen quickly. We're talking about 50 or more years to change the shape of a New Zealand city, even with the sort of draconian town planning that they've been using up there. But if 50 years out is not worth much, we're not going to get any results. So it really matters. So we need some kind of mechanism within what I hope is always going to be a frugal public spend to compare current state spend with future social benefits. But one feature of it that I just want to stress here, and it'll come back in the presentation I'm going through now, is that it has to reflect the key factors of what makes the state the state. So think about some basics. All of the 4 points that were on the previous slide are classical investments. Capital's taken from other use, it costs you in the meantime, so there's a negative flow, and then it generates positive returns. So there's a clear appraisal method if this was some kind of private investment. The people who bear the consequences will make up their own minds about whether it's worth doing. But it's completely different if it's a public investment, because backing the whole state and making the state special and unique is its coercive power. Everything the state does depends on the fact that it can force you to undertake the results it wants, one way or another. So withdrawing future investments and creating alternatives, which is what some kind of a public investment program is going to do, will have effects on the rest of the economy, but it'll have second round effects once the future investments flow in. So that's one effect we'll have to take into account. And you'll note the emphasis on the state's power. It's the difference between the state action and those of other agents. And the state has non-market mechanisms available, taxes and straight out commands, which you might call laws or rules or regulations or whatever. So what's the sort of approach I'm thinking about? I'm thinking about the fact that economics supports social decisions, and I'm trying here to, you'll see these the sort of principles that I think we're trying to avoid the values and not get the excuse me, the politics confused with the process. Economic advisors have to recognise that all political decisions, even those using economics, are political. That's the definition of them. The accountability is political, the way they're made is political, and they're designed to be political because that's the way we've assigned those decisions. So while advisors obviously have to select information, it mustn't hide the key features of the decision. And also, it's got to be practical. What might make a real difference in the world when things are being implemented. So any process that we choose for advising or making these decisions has to be able to practically work. So where do we start? What's the kind of background we face? Well, hands up all those in this room that are comfortable doing a CBA. 1, 2, 3, 4, yeah, sort of what I expected. No, well, not everybody is. It's not a trivial task. Who's happy with the selection of the discount rate? Or I should have asked that before you put your slide up. Norman, you've given people the answer. Are we happy with the way that it's been selected? Hands up all those that would be, in the course of doing that CBA, quite straightforwardly able to judge what the discount rate would be. Nobody. That's interesting. You just confused them, Norm.
They're afraid you're going to ask them to justify.
And then finally, to quote a technical term that comes straight out of the literature here, who's heard of the shadow price of capital and would be able to employ it? There we are. All the finance specialists. Great. Happy to use it? Okay. So being positive, what we see in the process of trying to sort out how we make a social decision is the 3 problems. We want to avoid crowding out, opportunities being foregone, particularly in the private sector. We want to get the intertemporal choices right between long-sightedness and myopia. And we want to prioritise. We want to get the best projects that we can within this limited budget. So, what do high discount rates do? Well, they deal a bit crudely with crowding out, fairly crudely. The higher it is, the less crowding out there's going to be. That's fairly crude. They distort the result of intertemporal comparisons because it's not quite clear whose intertemporal comparisons are being made. And it does, though, successfully create a priority ordering, even if heavily favouring the short term.